Okay, the last time we were together, we discussed the flower, which is a reproductive system. And so now we're going to focus on the human reproductive systems because that's what our Regents exam would like us to focus on. So, if you look at this diagram here, you will see that there is an ovary. The ovary is yellow in this diagram, and it's often depicted as kind of lumpy. And just so you know, if you're looking at it, it's kind of lumpy. And the ovary, when it releases an egg, the egg will then go into the fallopian tube. The fallopian tubes are sometimes called oviducts. That's a word that you need to know. It's often used synonymously with the phrase fallopian tube. So you will need to know that phrase, like I just said. Anyway, once the egg goes into the fallopian tube, that is where fertilization is most likely to take place, if it's going to take place at all. And then the egg will continue traveling through the fallopian tube into the uterus. So this purple portion right here on the uterus represents muscle. The uterus is a very, very muscular organ. And then the pink part on the inside represents the lining of the uterus right here. This is the lining of the uterus, which is also sometimes called the endometrium. So females, when they menstruate, or which is more colloquially called when they get their periods, it's actually this lining of the uterus that is shedding. So when the lining of the uterus sheds, it has to leave the uterus somehow. It does so through the cervix. Cervex is a British spelling for the word. In American language, we spell it with an I, but it's referring to the same structure. And then, of course, the tissue will leave through the vagina and exit the body. All right, so this is a frontal view of the female reproductive system. You can see a waist here, and then you can see it widens into hips, and you can see here space between the thighs, so you know you're looking at a frontal view right here of the reproductive system. So, some important things for you to know. The ovaries are paired, meaning there are two of them in a normal female reproductive system, in a normal human female reproductive system. When I say normal reproductive systems from here on out, I will be talking about the human reproductive system, unless I specifically say I'm going to talk about some other kind of reproductive system. They're paired organs, and the ovaries produce ova, which is a fancy word for what? Eggs, right? So ovaries produce eggs, and they also produce two hormones. And the two hormones that are produced in the ovaries are estrogen and progesterone. Now, do either of those sound familiar to you? Estrogen. Estrogen is considered to be the female sex hormone. What is the corresponding sex hormone in males? Correct, testosterone. Good. So estrogen is what makes people have more feminine features, and testosterone makes people have what we would consider more manly features. Fallopian tubes, I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote this. Maybe I wasn't. Fallopian tubes are not eustachian tubes. Please cross that out. Eustachian tubes are the tubes that connect your ear canal to like your throat. So has nothing to do with reproduction. So fallopian tubes are also called oviducts, as they are, as I've written right there. And your fallopian tubes also are paired, meaning they come in pairs. There are two of them in a normal female human reproductive system. And they essentially act as the tunnel that connects the ovary to the uterus. And if fertilization is going to occur, it will usually occur within the fallopian tube. It is very unusual for fertilization to occur outside the fallopian tube and to result in a viable offspring in humans. And we will discuss why in a little bit. Oh, excuse me. The uterus, the lining of the uterus is called the endometrium. This word is right here. Have you ever heard of someone who has endometriosis? So endometriosis is a condition where the lining, the tissue that lines the uterus, is found in places outside the uterus. So in other places in the body, usually generally in the abdominal area. It's usually very painful, and in some women it can even result in infertility. So endometriosis is not really a good thing. But I just thought you might be able to relate that back to endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus. The uterus is the site of early human development. So if ever I ask you, or the Regents asks you, or someone asks you, what does the uterus do, or what is the function of the universe? Now that's a good question. What is the function of the uterus? The answer is site of early human development. The uterus does not hold the baby. The mommy holds the baby. The daddy holds the baby. The grandparents hold the baby. Maybe the big sister, the big brother does. I don't know, but the uterus does not hold the baby. You don't even have a baby until after it's born. So once it's born, it's out of the uterus. We do not call it a baby when we're talking about the development in utero. We either refer to the embryo or the fetus. Okay, so whatever you do, you are going to tell me that the uterus is the what? Site of early human development. If we are talking about pigs, then the uterus would be the site of early human development? No, the site of early pig development. Very good. So any organism that has a uterus and is a placental mammal, meaning has a placenta, as opposed to a marsupial or a monotreme. You know what those are?
Marsupial, like a kangaroo, has a pouch.
Exactly. A marsupial has a pouch, just like a kangaroo. So the organism is actually born before it's fully developed. Then it climbs into the pouch where it fully develops. And monotremes are like platypuses. They're like platypi, if I'm going to be grammatically correct. And yes, they are mammals that lay eggs. Miranda, does your question, should it be on here or should I pause it for a second?
I don't know. It kind of has to do what you just said.
Okay, go ahead. What's your question?
Okay. You know how, like, when a baby is born, that's like its birthday, that's like the day old?
Correct.
Why isn't it, like,
When fertilization occurs?
yeah.
Good question. Because scientists doctors, it's very hard to know exactly when fertilization has occurred, and usually doctors can get it right within, say, a week or so, but you can definitely tell when the baby is born. You can't definitely tell when the egg was fertilized, so I think that's why we just call it.
Older than we are right now.
Well, you're 9 months more developed. However, because that's the way society deems your age, as it starts on the day you were born, I don't know, you can think about it that way, but it's interesting because with premature babies, say you were born 3 months early or something, like at 6 months, right? So that person's birth date is at 6 months. So they'd be considered, let's see, so when they are 1 year old, they're actually the equivalent of a 9-month-old in terms of their development. Does that make sense to you? So you have to like subtract the time that they weren't in the uterus. So I don't know, it's a really good question, because if we could somehow figure out how to count a birth date from the time of fertilization, it would make more sense for a lot more people, I think, in terms of like schooling. All right, anyway. The cervix is next. The cervix is both the entrance and the exit to the uterus. And it is the opening between the uterus and the vagina. Sperm travels through the cervix if it's going to fertilize an egg, and the fetus and also any endometrium that needs to leave the uterus will leave the body through the cervix and the vagina, which is also known as the birth canal. And it's also important for you to recognize that that is the entry point for any sperm that will be entering the reproductive system in order to result in offspring. Okay, I'm going to pause this for a second until we get to the male reproductive system.